there shouldn't be a debate because there actually isn't a debate about why the case was dropped. We already know. DOJ officials explained it in detail today. Read the filings. It's worth it. They're online. Clearly, almost nobody commenting on the case has read them, and they should. The documents are shocking, not to Republicans or Democrats, but to Americans. We've outlined much of what we knew about the Flynn case in previous segments on the show. How a corrupt FBI official called Peter Strzok decided to derail Mike Flynn using any means necessary. At one point, Strzok considered charging Flynn under something called the Logan Act. The Logan Act is a 220-year-old law that in the entire span of American history has never been used to convict a single person. In fact, no one's even been indicted under the Logan Act since before the Civil War. And by the way, it's probably unconstitutional. You probably couldn't do it now if you wanted. But Strzok didn't care. His goal was to keep the investigation going, whether he had a legal justification for doing that or not. By January 4th of 2017, the FBI had already completed its investigation of Flynn, which was thorough. After 4 months of looking into Flynn, they found, quote, no derogatory information of any kind linking Flynn to Russia. Now, fair investigation, the kind that we have a right to expect as Americans, would have ended right there. And according to the DOJ today, it should have ended right there. Quote, the department does not believe there was a legitimate basis to investigate and prosecute the designated national security advisor for communicating with a foreign ambassador and seeking to mollify geopolitical tensions in advance of the inauguration of the next president. And that's the essence of it right there. Michael Flynn did not commit a crime, and they knew it. How did they know? Because the FBI had already tapped Michael Flynn's phone, which itself is a shocking outrage, completely unacceptable in a free country, that for some reason nobody in Washington seems to notice or care about. They should. Because the FBI already knew what Flynn had said in the call in detail, there was, the department announced today, quote, no justification or need to review Mr. Flynn as to his own personal recollections of what had been said, because they knew. In other words, the whole thing was a setup from the first moment. Now, we know this for certain. We're not speculating because we have Peter Strzok's text messages to his creepy government lawyer girlfriend, Lisa Page. But what if we didn't have those text messages? We almost didn't. At first, you'll recall, the FBI claimed they'd been lost due to some technical glitch. So we almost didn't find out what really happened in this case. Michael Flynn almost went to prison. And that gets to the nub of all of this, the most important question of all. How often does the FBI set people up? How many other lives have they destroyed without the public knowing about it? In other words, this isn't about Michael Flynn, it's about you. It's scary to think about that. Most people in Washington seem determined not to think about it. They're intent on excusing all of this. Ilhan Omar was among the first to chime in on the news today. White privilege at work, she tweeted. Omar didn't explain what in the world Mike Flynn's case might have to do with his skin color, which he cannot control. But she denounced the decision as racist anyway. Surprised? You shouldn't be surprised. Ilhan Omar is a person who clearly married her own brother in an immigration scam, who passionately hates the country that saved her, who reduces every conceivable issue to the most vicious kind of race baiting. Can a single human being actually be as loathsome as Ilhan Omar is? It's hard to believe. She's like a parody of repulsiveness. Sometimes you doubt she really exists. The RNC must have created her. We can't confirm that, of course. We can say with confidence the RNC did not create cable news. The dummies there were almost as angry as Ilhan Omar was. Watch Jeb Bush's former flack take a break from sucking up to professional Harvey Weinstein enablers like Noah Oppenheim to lecture the rest of us about smear campaigns.
Mike Flynn's lawyers have been engaged in a smear campaign, very, very similar, torn out of the same playbook as the smear campaign Donald Trump ran against many of the same FBI leaders.
The idea that the Justice Department could do this, you called it stunning. It's past stunning. This is the collapse of the Justice Department. This is a political and incredibly destructive thing to the rule of law.
It's not good for the rule of law. It's not good for morale. And it's not a fair outcome in this case.
Today, we've seen the political corruption of the justice system that Mike Flynn has long been calling for. The Justice Department had nothing to do with this. This was the White House 100%.
The fix is in. This is an absolute injustice.
So what exactly are these people saying? What argument are they really making? Mike Flynn was set up by corrupt law enforcement officials. They suggested their goal was to, quote, get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired. That's not speculation. The FBI wrote that down on paper. Flynn faced a maximum of 5 years in prison. Are the people you just saw really arguing that Flynn's prosecution was legitimate? Are they arguing he should serve the time behind bars? It's enough to make you dizzy. Keep in mind, these are supposed to be, quote, liberals. Okay, so whatever happened to their commitment to civil rights, to fairness? In fact, there's nothing liberal about the arguments they are making. This is the most brutal kind of power politics disguised with lies. This moment represents the full collapse of an apolitical Justice Department, wrote CNN's legal analyst Susan Hennessy. MSNBC's Justice analyst Matthew Miller agreed with that. Quote, Barr is giving Flynn treatment that would not be available to any other American. And just in case you wondered if all these responses were coordinated, because of course they were, the world's angriest former labor secretary, Robert Reich, wrote this, quote, under William Barr's stewardship, the Justice Department has become nothing more than a political tool for Trump to wield against his enemies and withdraw against his friends. This is how dictatorships are built. Pause and consider this. Once again, it is head spinning in its falseness. It's the opposite of what's true. Dropping the case against Michael Flynn means the Justice Department is now a political tool? No. Flip it around 180 degrees. The Attorney General dropped the case because the Justice Department was already being used as a political tool to remove the National Security Advisor of the United States. That's the whole point. It's not a debate. No honest person could reach any other conclusions. Read the documents yourself. But these are not honest people. These are people who applauded when Adam Schiff of California baselessly denounced his political opponents as Russian agents, including this show. Naturally, Schiff himself weighed in today, too. He couldn't help himself. Quote, Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his illicit Russian contacts. His lies do not now become truths. This dismissal does not exonerate him. Wait, what? Is Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, now claiming that a call between the incoming National Security Advisor and the Russian ambassador to the United States is, quote, an illicit Russian contact? He is claiming that. This is insanity, and it's calculated insanity. And in the end, hate to tell you, it may work. It is entirely possible your grandchildren will be reading Adam Schiff's version of history 20 years from now. That's why they're saying it. That's the goal. In the meantime, you should consider what it would mean if unscrupulous liars like these were ever to take full control of this country. They know Michael Flynn is not a dangerous criminal. If he was a dangerous criminal, they'd be working to free him from jail. No, they wanted Flynn crushed purely because he happened to be in the way of the power they seek. And that's why they're still trying to put Roger Stone behind bars, because he mocked them to their faces and that diminished their authority. Roger Stone may still go to prison, by the way. We'll keep you posted. But the question is, how many other inconvenient Americans would they bankrupt and imprison if they could? Let's hope we never find out. In the meantime, you should ignore their yelping. Turn it off. This is an offense against equal justice, they scream into the camera. Right. The very same people who demand day after day that we hold American citizens to completely different standards based on how they look. Now they're telling you justice must be blind. It's absurd. It's insulting. The essence of fairness in every country at every time is fairness. Fairness. What the federal government did to Mike Flynn was demonstrably and provably unfair. And anyone who refuses to admit that in the face of overwhelming evidence should not wield power. Andy McCarthy is a former assistant U.S. attorney, author of the book Ball of Collusion. We're happy to have him join us tonight. So how would you say, putting on your prosecutor hat for a moment, trying to assess this objectively, how overwhelming is the case DOJ made today against its own prosecution of Flynn?
The case is overwhelming, Tucker, and it's worth adding to what you said, that the most damaging information that's come out so far about these investigators has been from the Obama-appointed Inspector General, and the papers that the Justice Department filed today are replete with Obama administration officials telling the FBI that they couldn't conduct things this way. They got that admonition from Sally Yates, then the acting Attorney General, from Clapper, the DNI at the time, the National Intelligence Director, and even from John Brennan at CIA. So these papers, when you read them, this is not, Bill Barr plucking a bunch of political arguments out. This is a well-supported argument with immense direct citation to a lot of supporting evidence that shows something we already know, which is that against protocol and under circumstances where they had no case, the FBI set up a perjury trap interview for Mike Flynn, discouraged him from getting counsel and from notifying the White House authorities, who should have been alerted if the FBI wanted to interview somebody on the White House staff. And one of the things that Bart doesn't get into today, but is very alarming, is the monkeying they did with the report of the interview of Flynn. And I think when you look at all the things that are brought together in the memo, you come away with exactly what the Justice Department said, which is they did not have a case that they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Flynn was guilty. And if that's where you're coming from as a prosecutor, you have an ethical obligation not to go forward.
And just to be totally clear, since you've done this for a living, that's universally understood among prosecutors, I would assume, right? That seems like a fair standard.
Well, it's not only universally understood, it's you know, if you don't want to be embarrassed and look like a moron in court, you don't want to go in with a case that you can't win. And the case now, Tucker, against Flynn, it consists of a report that they can't justify, which is the interview summary that has multiple versions and that they've made misrepresentations about who did what, and the testimony of two agents, Peter Strzok and Joe Pientka, who is the case agent on the Trump-Russia case and would be impeachable on the basis of all the misrepresentations that were made to the FISA court. That's your case going into court.
Unbelievable. So they just threatened his son and forced him to sign a confession. It's really scary. Andy McCarthy, I appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Janine Pirro hosts Justice with Judge Janine every Saturday. She joins us tonight. Judge, thanks so much for coming on. So, again, I just have to say it again, this isn't just about Michael Flynn. It's about every American citizen who might find him or herself in the crosshairs of federal law enforcement. How should we feel about this? If we didn't have these texts, we wouldn't know. How often does this happen? Can we trust that there is justice?
You know, I have to tell you, Tucker, I spent 32 years as a prosecutor and as a judge, and I believe in the system. Nothing has shaken my confidence more than this particular case, the Michael Flynn case and the Mueller investigation. What you had here was a Jim Comey, Cardinal Comey, they used to call him behind his back at the FBI, who was a hardened political operative, who took advantage of the fact that it was a new administration, as you and Andy McCarthy have been saying, since these FBI agents in denial of protocol, telling him he didn't need a lawyer, and the whole purpose was to frame him so that they could squeeze him to set up the President of the United States in order to change the course of American history. These are corrupt people in the DOJ and in the FBI, at the upper echelons, clearly. And my concern is when you talk about texts that the FBI says they're missing of the lovers, Page and Strzok, you know, where they say the White House wants to know everything that's going on. And then fast forward to the prosecution of Michael Flynn, where they misplaced 17,000 pages that were now being handed over to Michael Flynn's new lawyer. Guess who was in that law firm that where the lawyers representing Michael Flynn in the case originally were? Eric Holder. It is a swamp in Washington. You've got Eric Holder, you've got Mueller, who supposedly looked at this case. I mean, the guy's got to be non-compos mentis at this point. And it clearly is an example of what goes on when they hate you, when they focus on you. So why did they hate Michael Flynn? I'll tell you why. He was named the Director of National Intelligence by Obama. And there was a hearing that he testified in front of Congress. And Obama had just gotten off, I killed bin Laden, and now Al-Qaeda is on the run. And the truth is that when Michael Flynn got up and testified, he said, Michael, that Al-Qaeda's not on the run. In fact, they're in North Africa, and they've got training camps in the Middle East now. It was not long after that that he was fired. They also knew that he knew where all the bodies were, and that he was going to streamline the intelligence community.